Welcome, everybody. Thank you for taking the time to join us today. We shall discuss the five-step approach to the global collaborative demand planning process. I am Winfred Amwako, and I will be moderating the webinar together with.
My name is Helen Oki, and I'm the marketing manager, and I think I've been on these webinars quite a bit. So today I'm just going to be doing questions, and Winfred will be doing a lot of the talking. So welcome, everyone.
Welcome, Helen. Our presenter is also an Akiva project manager, and he's by name.
Hi, I'm Abhishek.
Before we get started, I'd like to mention that if at any point in time you have trouble hearing us, please let us know by using the chat feature in GoToWebinar, and we will be sure to assist you. Also, we will reserve a few minutes at the end of the webinar for questions. Please feel free to enter your questions as you think of them using the GoToWebinar questions window. And we hope you can take a few minutes at the end of the webinar to complete our feedback survey to help us ensure that you get the most out of our webinars. Before we get started, I would like to give a brief overview of Akiva. At Akiva, we believe that improved business performance starts with better planning. As a result, your Akiva team has only one goal in mind, which is to ensure that you achieve better planning goals without forcing you to fit a software mold. We celebrate your unique business processes. This gives you the power to keep your business processes intact. We start every Akiva solution creation process with one question in mind. How can we empower you with a better planning process? Our goal is to put you in the driver's seat to steer your improved business performance goals. In order to do this, we provide one plan S&OP solutions. We define one plan S&OP as an integrated demand-driven sales and operations planning process for dynamic business performance. It promotes cross-functional synchronizations across the company, starting from integrated financial planning to demand, inventory management to create a more dynamic S&OP management process using real-time dashboards. In today's webinar, we will show our collaborative features with Akiva. This product is part of our demand planning solution. The Akiva Demand Planner empowers you with the solutions needed for creating a one-plan demand planning process that allow you to proactively respond to demand and collaborate in real time to help you discover actionable insights to better demand planning. All Akiva solutions are powered by our in-memory database for fast data analysis and real-time insights. Our solutions comes with real-time KPIs, dashboards, and reports. In this webinar, we will discuss how to collaborate in your demand planning process. This process is standard in every Akiva implementation. So let's look at today's discussion topics. We will kick off the webinar with an overview of collaborative demand planning. Then we will explore the five-step approach to a collaborative demand planning process, after which we will delve into the exciting features of the Akiva Collaborative Demand Planner. Finally, we will also touch on the key metrics to use to measure your collaborative demand planning. So let's look at today's discussion topics, Abhishek. I am going to turn this over to you. Can you explain the Akiva Demand Planning Framework?
Sure. Thank you, Winfred. So before we get into the collaborative piece, I want to give a little overview on the entire demand planning framework. So as you can see here, the demand planning framework involves a lot of different steps. You start off with a lot of historical data, which you do some analysis on or segment your portfolio, and then that becomes an input to create a baseline forecast. And once you have a good statistical forecast, then is when the actual collaboration demand planning piece comes in, where you try to get input from a lot of people, internal as well as external to the company. And eventually we tie that back with a performance management system where we are able to track how good of a collaborative process it is or how good of a statistical forecast we are creating. And finally, in the demand review meeting, we come up we include all of that collaborative input as well as statistical forecast along with all the KPIs to come up with a final consensus forecast.
So Abhishek, thanks for explaining the framework. One thing that stands out to me in this framework is the fact that we have the collaborative demand plan in the middle of the process. Just looking at this diagram, is that something, should organizations be thinking of the collaborative process as a whole? How do you think about it more holistically instead of just this little piece in the entire framework?
Right. Although it is in the middle of the framework, it is really important in the sense that you could reap a lot of different benefits if you do this process right. So statistical forecast is just a start, but collaborative piece is where the actual qualitative input comes in and makes the forecast actually work, because statistical forecast is historically looking, but collaborative piece is where you get the future insights into the system. So that's where I think the entire holistic approach comes in, where you are able to get insights from external parties as well.
Thanks for that.
Okay, so talking about today's presentation on collaborative demand planning, I would like to address first of all what is collaborative demand planning. So it is nothing but, in simple words, a process to collect and reconcile information from diverse sources inside as well as outside the company. Right. So we will go ahead and try to answer some questions related to collaborative demand planning, and we will also share with you some of the examples that we have seen from our own clients and the benefits that they have gotten. So the other question is, why is there a need for a collaborative demand planning, right? So I would like to address that with 4 high-level reasons. One of them being statistical tool is not adequate, or is almost always not adequate to get the qualitative input, and collaboration is where you can get this collaborative input or qualitative input which is future looking. And the other thing is you are able to tap the information in the minds of the people, because statistical forecast will give you a historical or backward looking input, but when you talk to people, when you talk to customers, or you look at your competitors, what they are doing, and try to adjust your demand planning system, that is the biggest advantage of why you should collaborate. And that information could be, are there any new products being introduced? Are there any promotions that marketing team is running? Are there any price increases, or is any customer is going out of the business? So all of this information, if we can tie that and put that into the system, then that gives us a more holistic view on what the demand is going to look like a few months or a few years down the line. And the other biggest advantage is that it helps you get commitment within your company on what we should be planning for, right? So sometimes it happens that if you do not have collaboration process, then a lot of different departments, for example, the sales reps are planning on a number, but the operation team is not really aware of it, and they really are planning for a totally different number. And then that creates a lot of friction between the organization. So once you have this collaboration process in place, it also helps you get commitment from different departments within your company. So some more reasons for collaboration. So this is from one of our experiences with working with a big global company, that multinational company servicing a diverse customer base. This global company with assets positioned around the world and need to quickly respond to changes in a competitive marketplace. So all of these reasons drove for one of our customers to get our solution, basically, and incorporate our tool in designing the entire collaboration process. Some of the other benefits that I want to share specific to a few industries. For example, we did a collaboration planning process at one of our chemical gases company, and the results that they got, first of all, they did not have this process in place. They only had a spreadsheet based approach, where they used to call their sales rep up and get their inputs and update the spreadsheet, which took really long time. And once they were able to put that system in place, eventually in a year or so, they saw that their actual forecast accuracy improved by almost 30%. And they also saw an overall reduction in their forecasting process by almost a week or so when they put in place an exception-based collaborative forecasting. We will go into detail of what that means, basically what the exception-based process means later on in the presentation. Okay, then a few more questions that I want to address is that with whom do you collaborate, right? So at a high level, I think, sorry, at a high level, anyone and everyone that has some sort of insights related to the demand or related to the future, you should be able to tap that information and be able to collaborate with them. Now that can be your sales reps, that can be your marketing team, that can be your product team. For example, marketing team would know best about what are the planned promotions coming into future and how that will affect the demand. The product team might know what are the new products that are being introduced a year from now or 2 years from now, and how would they cannibalize old products and thus affecting the demand for those products. And not just the internal teams, but even externally, you should be able to look at a lot of competition to see what are their products or their promotions and how would that impact your demand pattern. Okay, and finally, I want to address, so what exactly do you collaborate on? You have all these insights, and within your company, you have a lot of products and a lot of customers also, and it is almost always impossible to touch upon every single customer or every single product within the organization. So some of the ways is to you have to pick and choose which items you should collaborate on, and we will go into detail in at least one of the ways on how you can do that. But at a high level, you sort of segment your portfolio. Let's say if you are trying to use variability, then you might want to choose your highly variable items and put your efforts on those sort of items so that you can get the most advantage, because those are the ones that are really difficult in terms of predicting when it comes to statistical forecasting. You should also be able to choose the items that require special input. So like we talked about new product introductions, there is no historical data there. So the best way there is to be able to get some sort of human input in order to figure out what the sales would look like. So another example that I want to share is of a discrete manufacturing company and how or what kind of benefits that they saw by implementing the collaboration process. So they saw an overall improvement in customer satisfaction and a lot of reduction in their inventory. And how they used their collaboration process was they were tracking their accuracy matrix at the end of each month to see how good of a particular collaborative forecast input was, and trying to always improve that entire collaboration experience to be able to get or put their efforts into the inputs that were giving them the most benefit, right? And they were addressing that for every 6 months or so and trying to change their collaboration process. And in a way, they saw a lot of improvement in their inventory as well as customer satisfaction. So we see there are a lot of benefits to having a good collaboration process in place. So let's just get into how a collaboration process would help you and what are the different steps that you can use in collaboration.
Yeah, Abhishek, before we get into that,
Yeah.
I think you did a very great job just sharing some customer examples. One thought that comes to mind is, do most people already have this collaborative process defined before they implement a solution like Arqiva, or is that something that you usually would define as you're implementing the solution? So I know we have some people on the call that are pretty new with the process. What's the usual way that goes?
Right. Working with some of my clients, what I've noticed is they have some sort of collaboration process in place, but not exactly a good tool set or a well-defined process. What I mean by that is what I've seen is most of the clients, they have spreadsheet-based approach where they would call in a lot of their sales representatives every month to be able to get their input and update the forecast and then share it with everyone in the organization. However, different people are tracking different spreadsheets and it becomes difficult for them. So that is where this a centralized tool set helps in a global set of getting to a fixed collaborative forecast number. Okay, so let's look at how do you collaborate? What are the different steps in collaborative demand planning? So sometimes what sales rep do is they when they go to a customer, they talk to them and kind of sense what 2 or 3 months down the line the forecast scenario would look like. So that is sort of, you can definitely consult informally and try to get that feedback from them. But main contributors, they would need some sort of formal mechanism so that they can record their input into the system, and the different teams within the same company can actually leverage that because they have a centralized system and everyone can refer to that number when it comes to looking at what the demand picture would look like a few months or a few years down the line. So you need some sort of a formal mechanism and a proper process in place, meaning who are the collaborators, at what time they would go in, and at what level they would be providing their input at. So all of that should be properly lined out in a well-defined collaborative process. And eventually you should have some sort of owner who would own a final demand plan, and he or she would be the person who would be driving this entire process up to the point where you get a final demand plan, and that is what they can share with the entire company. Now, it doesn't necessarily have to be one person. When it comes to a global company, there can be multiple people working in different countries to get to that final demand plan because everyone is working on a different timeline. But eventually, there needs to be some sort of owner who can own that process and kind of drive the entire company to achieve that one collaborative forecast number. Okay, so let's look at if I were to define a step-by-step approach of a 5-step approach to collaborative demand planning process. At a high level, these are the steps that I would include. It doesn't have to be specifically these 5 steps, depending upon how your business is. It can be redefined, but at a high level, these are the steps that you should definitely include if you are looking at a collaborative demand planning process. So first of all, you should have a right tool or process to integrate a lot of diverse inputs from different sets of people at different levels. You should definitely have an owner. We briefly touched upon this a little bit earlier. And then you should have some way of reducing bias. And I say that because the collaborative process is getting inputs from a lot of different people, basically humans. And sometimes humans have a tendency to be optimistic or pessimistic, and that tends to add a lot of bias. So one thing is to be aware of that and try to reduce that bias as much as possible. And we'll look at how we can do that. And then it should be an exception-based process, meaning it's not possible to be able to address each and every customer's forecast or each and every SKU's forecast every single month. So there should be some sort of way you can pick and choose which items would give you the most benefit when you spend your time in collaboration. And finally, you should have some sort of a feedback loop. So we should be able to track the right matrix and provide that feedback into the process so that we can make this process better and better as we move forward. Okay, so let's look at this in a little bit more detailed on how the process would look like. So this is an example of one of the collaborative process and how it looks like in a little bit detail. Now, I'll go ahead and share the tool as well on how it looks in the tool, but at a high level, you have a few inputs or steps in the process. So we start off with a statistical forecast on the left, as you see. Then that becomes your baseline forecast or an input to the collaborative process. And after that, you try to get inputs from different people. So it's possible that the first input would be from the sales reps, where we are calling that as a sales forecast. And a lot of sales reps would come in and try to adjust or provide their input and enhance the statistical forecast based on what they know. And once they have their input in, we look at the next level, which could be regional forecast, where the regional managers are looking at the number on region level and kind of provide their a sense of what the demand pattern would look like over a year or so for their region. And then finally, the owner, a demand planner or a demand manager should be able to get all of these inputs or look at all of these inputs and figure out a way how they can come up with that final forecast where the entire company can plan their supply off of. So the key point here is that different people should be able to enter the forecast at different levels, and we should also be able to track it so that eventually we can provide that feedback to see who did how much better in terms of forecast when eventually the actual demand comes in and we roll forward into the future. Yeah.
Great. Thanks for sharing this process. I feel it gives a broad overview on how we should approach this. So in regards to deciding an owner, how do you resolve conflicts? So when you have conflicts, different numbers, how do you go about resolving that?
Right. So that also depends on business and how many inputs do you have and what's the process to come up with that final number. Sometimes what I've seen is that you have a step-by-step approach in the sense that the baseline forecast goes into the sales forecast, and then the sales reps come in and adjust the numbers. And once they are done with their forecast, that number rolls into a regional forecast line, and the regional managers either can accept those numbers or can adjust those numbers, and then that eventually flows into the final forecast. So that can be one of the methods of how you can come up with a final forecast or resolve the issues. The other one can be to assign some sort of weightage to every single forecast and come up with some sort of a weighted forecast based on statistical, sales, and regional. So these are some of the ways which we have seen how users take advantage of different inputs at different levels. Yeah. Okay, so we see this process, but how does this look in the tool? So I would like to share one of the examples here, and then we'll go into how it looks in Arqiva when it comes to the entire process. So this is one of the screenshots from the tool. What we are showing here is that there are different levels. So if you see the table, on the first column, we have different levels. First one being statistical forecast, then we have sales, then we have regional, marketing, and eventually we have a final demand plan. So any typical tool would be able to accommodate the forecasting input at different levels. So you would see something of a similar sort where you have by month, you have at a high level what the forecast is like, and then different people like sales reps, regional managers, they can come in and adjust their numbers. So they are also able to see the different levels of forecasts, and they are able to provide their input as well. And once we go into the tool, we'll see how this happens. The idea here is whoever provides input, we should be able to make sure we keep those separate so that we can eventually track and provide that feedback of how good of a forecast it was for example, for sales forecast or for regional forecast, which forecast did the best when it comes to comparing it with the actual sales that happened, right? In order to maximize the participation and buy-in, if possible, we should have different ways of providing that input. And when I say different ways, I mean it can be an iPad app, or it can be an actual tool set implemented on your servers or any of the customer servers, or it can be a simple spreadsheet also, because more often than not, what we have seen is it's sometimes difficult to explain new tool to the sales rep, and they are more used to this Excel-based approach. So the tool should be able to tie that Excel-based approach back to a centralized forecasting database. Okay, so I want to quickly open up the tool and show you at a high level how a collaboration process would look like within Arqiva tool set. So what you see here is it's an Archiva demand planning tool set. On the left, there are a whole lot of documents. If you are able to follow my cursor, I have this document called Sales Manager Collaboration. So it'll open in a second. But what we are trying to highlight here is the differences between the different levels. So I'm going to show you a Sales Manager Collaboration workbench. When I say workbench, it is basically a place where they can come in and adjust their numbers. So there are different workbenches. We have one Sales Manager Collaboration workbench. The other one is Regional Collaboration workbench. Third one being Demand Manager Collaboration workbench. So when we are looking at the first one, Sales Manager Collaboration, this one is intended towards sales reps. And when I say that because we are looking at this entire workbench at two different levels, one being product and the other one being shipped to, which is customers. So more often than not, the sales rep are the most closest to their customers, and they want to be able to adjust the numbers at customer level. And this tool set lets them adjust their numbers at specific individual customer levels. So for example, EI DuPont being one customer where AA300 product is being sold. So they can come in and you will see that there are different numbers across months. Anything that is in yellow is editable, and they can come in and adjust what they feel the forecast is going to look like X months down the line. So they can also look at the baseline statistical forecast. So you'll see there are three different numbers here or quantities. One is the shipment history, the other one is stat forecast, and the third one being sales forecast. And if I scroll a little bit to the left here, they can see historically what the forecast has been like, what it looks like in the future, and they can come in and adjust their numbers here. So for example, let's say for August 2018, they think they will be able to sell somewhere close to 5,000. They should be able to come in and enter their number and save this document. What that does is that it saves their override, if you want to call it that way, and that override then gets passed on to the next levels of input. So when we go into the regional collaboration workbench, that takes into account the overrides that they have made. Right, and they can also look at the chart at a high level on how their forecast looks like. So you see that there is an adjusted shipment history and the sales forecast, right? So they can look at the pattern also at a high level. So let's go into the second level, which is the regional collaboration. Now, as we said that the different people should be able to forecast at different levels, we will see that regional collaboration document here is designed in a way that they see their number by region, by product. So for example, if I were to collapse this document by region, you will see that they can see the numbers by Canada at a high level, and this would incorporate the inputs from their individual sales reps. So the number that you would see here in the sales forecast line would have those inputs from the sales reps. And then they can come in and expand onto individual regions, and they would look at their individual products and adjust the number as needed on regional forecast line. So they have an option of either accepting the sales forecast as it is, or they can come in and adjust the numbers. So for example, they can come in and say, okay, for these 3 months, the forecast is going to be a little bit higher than what it is. So they can come in and adjust the number by doing a little bit of percentage change. They can say that the forecast is going to be 5% higher than what it was. So you will notice that this number would get to a 5% higher than what it was earlier. And that disaggregates down to individual customers also. So this AA300, wherever it is being sold, it will disaggregate that 5% increase to individual customers. So that's where the power of aggregation and disaggregation comes in, that even though they are entering the number at the high level, it disaggregates down to individual customers, because eventually the operation team needs to plan accordingly. They need to plan for every individual SKU or for every individual customers how much they are going to sell. So the forecast should be translatable to individual customers. And eventually, the third level is the demand manager collaboration. So eventually in the demand review meeting, the demand managers would like to get a very high level view of what the forecast is looking like. So for example, here in the specialty commodity or business, they are able to see at a very high level. When I say high level, you will see that it's the product family level, the two levels that at which they are looking their forecast at is by business, by product family level. So this is even rolled up than what a regional manager was forecasting at. And you will see that in their document, they are able to see the regional forecast as well as the final consensus forecast. And they can either accept the inputs from regional forecast or they can adjust that number on the consensus forecast. And then finally, at the end of the demand review meeting, the consensus forecast is what gets shared with everyone. And that's how the supply team also plans their their strategies accordingly. Okay. Yeah, go ahead, question.
Yeah, so we have a question here. So the question is around capturing assumptions. So the question says, how do you capture the assumptions around the changes to the number? So for instance, if you have pricing, promotions, customer downtime, competitive inroads to market share. So all the different assumptions, how do you capture that within the...
Right. So that's a very good question. So we need some sort of feedback, right? So somebody came in and changed the numbers. So for example, regional manager came in and adjusted this number to 500,000, right? So we should be able, when the demand manager comes in and sees the number to be very high, he should be able to tie that back to why that increase happened. So the regional manager would have a way to be able to add a comment to it. So you will see that when you right click, there is an option to add a comment. So they can right click here and add anything here that I don't know, new promotion or new plant with X customer, right? So that sort of feedback gets attached to this particular override. And when a demand manager comes in, they can click on show all comments, and you will see that there is a small arrow here, just like in Excel you would see. When you highlight over it or hover over it, it shows you if there are any comments to it. So that kind of gives them an idea why there was a change in the forecast. So anyone who has an ability to adjust forecast is also able to add their input on why they made that change. And that input it gets tracked all the way up in the system, that you can see the input not only at this AA level, but you will see that it also gets projected onto a very high level at the specialty level. So even though a sales rep would make adjustment at a customer level, it gets tracked back and it shows at a very high level also if a demand manager wants to come in and see why that change was made.
And Abhishek, going back to the previous slide, I think that iPad screen had a little bit of the agenda feature from Arqiva showing as well. I don't know if people can really see that, but there's the ability to really assign things to people in real time, comments as you're doing it, and it creates more of a chat feature as well, in addition to the fact that you can do comments. So that's also another way that you can collaborate, put some comments and assumptions in the system.
Okay. So we looked at the process and who should be the owner of the process. Then the next step would be next slide would be try.
Before we go into the next section, we also have a question here that may be related to that. So, so what if someone changes a forecast that's either totally high or low, that would skew the average? What's your recommendation for this?
Right. So if somebody came in, so again, yes, that's a very good question. If humans are coming in and adjusting the forecast, there is a tendency of being either optimistic or pessimistic, right? And that is the next thing I was going to address. How do you eliminate bias? But I think at a high level, every person or in the hierarchy, they are able to adjust the numbers in the sense that they can either accept the change that was made before, or they can come up with another number. So if let's say regional manager who is responsible for a lot of sales reps, he can come in and he can either accept the individual contributions by each sales rep, or he can come up and say something like, okay, all of my sales managers have been too optimistic in terms of forecasting. I want to, at a high level, in this region, I want to reduce the forecast by 5%. So what that will do is, because everybody has been optimistic and has increased the forecast, the regional manager can still come in and say that, okay, at a high level for this region, I want to reduce the forecast by 5%. And that should drive down for each individual customer the forecast. It should drive down a little bit for each customer.
So another follow-up question that we have for that is, does Arkiva create alerts if a user enters too high or too low of a forecast, let's say for the last 6 month average?
Yes, so we have these customized tools. Actually, we have an alerts module also, but we can go into detail regarding that alerts module in a later section. But at a high level, you can certainly create an alert saying that, okay, if somebody entered a number which is 10% higher than what it was originally, it will create an alert. It can show you a toast notification on your screen, or it can send you an email, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, additionally, we just to add to that, because the Arkiva alerting feature, it's called Pulse. We've done a webinar on that before. I believe if you can find it on our website, I believe if I'm not misquoting the title, but it has to do with how to improve your supply chain performance management, and that goes into a little bit more detail on the product, so you can check that out as well. Or we'll be happy to show you in more detail. We have another question here that talks about if you can run reports on effectiveness of promotions or interventions.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you figure out how effective the promotions are? So there are people going into the system, they're making all these changes because they think their promotion's coming up. How do we tie that promotion planning piece to what people are doing?
Right. So promotion planning is also another module that tracks exactly what you're talking about, how effective the promotions were. But when it comes to collaboration, if people are coming in and adjusting the forecast for the promotions that are going in, there is certainly matrix that you can track and see how good the forecast was, because it incorporated the promotions also in place. So if for example, for a particular promotion, you adjusted the number, and for that month, if the forecast error was too high, that could, if we were to drill down and point it back to that promotion, it could give us an insight that, okay, that promotion did not give us a good insight in terms of predicting the forecast. But if you are looking for exactly the effectiveness of the promotion, there is definitely a separate module that we have in Arkiva, which is called promotions planning, that we can touch upon later on. Okay, so how do you eliminate bias in your forecasting? So I think the first of all, we should be aware that because the human tendency is sometimes to be optimistic or sometimes to be pessimistic. Or in general, there are different personality types. We have to be aware that there is a tendency, there could be bias in the system, and we should be able to track bias moving forward when we are getting information from different people at different levels. And the common known causes are sometimes also the organizational matrix and how they are designed. That can also lead to a lot of biasness. So some of the examples can be a sandbagging approach, where you can under forecast and try to over deliver in order to beat your own numbers if your organizational matrix are set in that way. Or sometimes it can be month or year end hockey stick approach if you want to stay as close to the budget as possible. Sometimes you have a tendency to over forecast in order to keep your customers happy. So the general approach is to be aware that there are different ways biasness can enter into the system, and you should be able to track. Once we go into the matrix, we'll see that there are different ways you can track bias and how you can tie that back as a feedback loop into your collaboration process. And of course, if you can track, then you can work towards improving biasness or improving your entire collaboration process. The other thing when we touched upon the 5 steps of collaboration is because there are too many customers. Let's say if you have 100,000 customers, it's impossible to touch every single customers and try to predict how the future would look like or how much you are going to sell to each individual customers. Or if you have too many SKUs in your system, we have seen companies that have almost 500,000 SKUs, and it becomes challenging on how you collaborate when it comes to these many products. So the approach that you can take is to review by exceptions, and what we mean by that is you figure out a way where you can pick and choose items which are highly valuable in your organization, and try to collaborate on those items first, and not spend your time on items or SKUs that are not adding that much value in your organization. So this chart here kind of gives you a high level view of how you can start off with this approach. So on the left side on y-axis, you will see forecastability, where we have SKUs that would be either highly forecastable or not so forecastable. And on the x-axis, you will see what is the added value or the importance of your portfolio of customers or products. And you can categorize your entire data set in, for example, these two matrix. So the first one here is the items that are highly forecastable. And if you have a lot of these items in your portfolio which are highly forecastable, meaning they are not too variable, the variability is very low, and month over month you are seeing pretty much consistent demand. This happens a lot in CPG industries, that you have consistent demand month over month, and those kind of products you can actually trust more when it comes to baseline forecast. So you should try to avoid those types of products when it comes to collaborative forecasting. You can more often than not, you can trust the baseline forecast. Then the other piece is when you have some of the items that are not so forecastable, but they do not add that much value also in your forecasting or demand planning, then you can have any of those two approach. You can either rely on the baseline forecast or you can provide some sort of collaborative input there. So that's really up to the business on how they want to handle these kind of items. But the most important items would be these third section items, where they are of highly added value items, as well as the ones that are not so easily forecastable. So these kind of items would be highly variable, but they are also very important in terms of revenue that they are generating or the profits that they are generating. So this could be a general Pareto diagram where you can see that 20% of my products are delivering 80% of my revenue or volume. And you can first choose those items to collaborate on, because they are the ones who are driver of revenue or profits in your company. Yeah.
So another question we have here is for people in the CPG and food industries, when you have small niche products, doesn't mean that you shouldn't forecast those?
No, you should definitely forecast each and every item. So there should be, if there are niche items, you should be able to forecast, in the sense that there are you can choose some of the sporadic methods to be able to come up with forecast, or sometimes you can choose average methods, in the sense that if there are items that are too sporadic, then it becomes important how much inventory you are carrying, rather than forecasting when the next demand point would be. So you can have some sort of Poisson approach, where you are trying to predict how much inventory you would carry in order to have the maximum customer satisfaction, rather to be able to predict each individual month whether you are going to have demand or not. So those kind of items also you should be able to handle.
So essentially for businesses like that, they trust the system a bit more, just use the forecasting methods that are in the system. There might not be as much need for exception-based forecasting.
That is true. So if they are highly forecastable, for example, like CPG industries, you might trust the baseline forecast. But of course, everything gets tied back to the matrix where you have a feedback loop. So even if you are creating a baseline forecast, you are tracking that and calculating the error for even the baseline forecast. And when we go into the system, we'll see how, if we can place those forecast accuracy side by side, we should be able to provide that feedback loop that, okay, we considered these items as highly forecastable, but did the forecasting engine do a good job in predicting those or not? And if not, we should be able to pick and choose those items also and try to incorporate that into your collaboration process. Okay, so when I say review by exceptions, I'll take a minute and go into the Arqiva tool again to see how that can be taken into account when it comes to collaboration. So I'll take the simple example of, let's say, demand manager collaboration screen. If it can switch. Okay, let's look at the regional collaboration screen. When I say you should be able to review by exception, what I meant was, let's go to the filter screen here. So what I'm trying to do is I want to partition my portfolio to be able to look at only those products which are highly variable as well as which are very important. And you will see here there is an attribute called Arqiva ABC. So there I can choose A items which kind of have the most revenue. So I can select that, and then I can come in and select the ones that are highly variable, right? So I pick both of these and I hit select here. What it does is it reduces the number of customers that I'm looking at. It reduces the number of regions that I'm looking at, and it gives me a starting point of where I should first focus my attention onto. And the regional manager, since he is the one looking at a particular region and a particular product, you will see that he gets a very limited set of products now that he needs to look at. And this becomes even more useful when you are responsible for looking at each individual customer. So for example, on the fly here, if I want to change the level at which I'm looking at, I can certainly look at all my customers and products that are highly variable and are very important in terms of forecasting. So I can get rid of the region in my report here, and I can add customer here. So if I just type in customer, you see a customer here, or I think it is called ship to. So let's pick ship tos. And what I'm doing here is on the fly, I'm changing how the look and feel of the workbench is eventually. And here you'll see that once it populates, you will see that the customers that fall in that category, which are highly variable, and the ones that are really important, are a set of these 6 customers within that MAA 20% product line. So you'll see that some of these numbers are very high and also very highly variable. You'll see there is this sort of erratic or variable pattern in terms of demand. So these are the ones that you should, these should be our first priority, to be able to call them up and see or try to get a feel of how the next 6 months or the next year would look like. Yeah. Okay. So let's go to some of the next do's and don'ts of the collaborative demand planning. So at a high level, we looked at you should avoid adjusting too many combinations. So we looked at the review by exception method, where we try to in some way partition your portfolio and come up with a way that you can adjust the numbers for where you have the most value or the most insight into. And you should try to also avoid making very small adjustments, because if we think about it, at a high level, the forecast is very accurate. So if you are able to predict at a region level how much you are going to sell, that is probably going to be much more accurate as compared to each individual customer if you go in and predict. So at a high level, if you are able to make adjustments, then that in the long run would be much more accurate as compared to each individual customer forecast. So you need to try to avoid these things, and also you need to make sure you check for bias, meaning be especially conscious or cautious about being too optimistic or too pessimistic. So generally what we have seen is if you are able to adjust about 60% or less number of combinations in every month's collaboration process, then I think you're good enough. And more often than not, what we have seen is if you tend to make negative adjustments, they are more likely to improve forecast accuracy. What I mean by negative adjustments is if you reduce the forecast by a little bit rather than increasing the forecast, that has tend to be much more accurate as compared to where you are actually increasing the forecast. Um, this is just in general insight that we've had from our supervisors as well as customers. Okay, so we've been talking all along about the matrix. So let's just dive into it a little bit to see what kind of matrix we should be tracking and how we can provide that feedback and improve the collaboration process or experience. Uh, so if we look at the matrix at a high level, some of the basic matrix that we track is bias, how biased the forecast has been over a few months. What is the mean absolute percentage error? And this can be tracked for every single month, as well as, excuse me, sorry. Okay, so and mean absolute percentage error is another one where you can track your matrix, and the third one being forecast value add, meaning we have these different levels of forecast: sales reps forecast, collaboration forecast, demand manager forecast. So we should be able to track each and every forecast and be able to give that feedback on which forecast is giving you the best input. Uh, so let's go to the next slide here. I'll give you one of the examples of how we track that input. So here you'll see on the left side there is a forecast error chart where for every category, category A, B, C, and D, we are tracking how much the error was for statistical forecast, which is the black band, sales forecast, and consensus forecast. So you'll see that for product category A, the statistical forecast gave on average about 40% error, and when the sales team came in and adjusted the numbers, they saw a reduction in the error. And the consensus team also, when they provided their input, they improved the forecast by some amount. But when we see at the category B, we see that the statistical forecast gave a little over 25% error. But when the sales team came in and adjusted the forecast, they actually increased the error by over 40%. So for category B, the input from sales rep did not prove to be that much valuable. And if we try to dig a little deeper, on the right side here, we'll see a bias chart. So bias values typically range from -1 to 1, where positive numbers being optimistic and negative numbers being pessimistic. So we see that for category B here, the red bar which shows the sales bias, we see that they have been too optimistic in terms of forecasting. So that kind of gives you a little feedback that okay, for some reason for category B, the sales team has been consistently over forecasting. So we can try to go in and figure out what are the causes to see how we can adjust that biasness.
Okay, so we have a few questions here. So what indicator for forecastability do you recommend? Is coefficient of variation? Then how do you treat seasonal and trend demand patterns?
Right. So there are three things. Of course, you should be definitely looking at matrix. You should be definitely looking at bias, and you should be reviewing by exception. So for, let's say, for example, seasonal items where you see a lot of variability, well, seasonal will inherently show a lot of variability because there are months where you have higher demand versus months which have lower demand. So there the matrix gives you a very good idea because even the statistical forecast there will give you a seasonal pattern, and then the MAPE value will not be that high, meaning the error will not be that high. So you should definitely consider error also in terms of how you collaborate. You should definitely consider the ones that historically have not given you a good accuracy in forecasting.
Okay. And I think it was the question around the do's and don'ts as well. So I think it was the third point about being especially cautious. about being too optimistic. And I believe it may have something to do with when you were talking about the negative adjustments.
Right.
So just explaining it a little bit further.
Right. So, sales rep, because they are more closer to customers, they have a good idea of how much they are going to sell to individual customers, and that they then tend to adjust each individual customer numbers. And what that does to the forecast is that when you aggregate those numbers, it tends to drive the forecast uh, up by a whole lot amount when you aggregate the number at a very high level. So they tend to adjust the forecast at each individual customer level, and sometimes they tend to be a little optimistic in forecasting, and then that tends to be driving the forecast on a higher side when you aggregate and look at the number at regional level or category level or a product family level. So that's where we say that when it comes to the role of a regional manager or demand manager, what we have seen is if they adjust the number by or lower it by 1%, then it tends to be improving their forecast accuracy a lot more than uh, increasing the forecast. So no, I mean it's not necessarily true for each customer or each business, but sometimes we have seen instances where adjusting the numbers negatively has improved forecast accuracy, and it can be totally different in a different business. So that's not set in stone. Okay, how much time do we have?
We just have about 5 minutes.
Okay, so I was going to go into give a demo for Matrix and Archiva as well, but it's going to be pretty much similar to what we saw in the previous slide. So I guess we can skip that maybe, and you want to talk about the summary?
Sure. Or maybe do we want to do a 2-minute version of that? Maybe.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So within the tool, if we look at how the matrix show up to be, uh, I'll open up this performance management tool where we will see we talked about MAPE, bias, and forecast value add. So I will quickly show you some of those charts and numbers, how they look in the tool. So once it loads, so this is a forecast accuracy chart. What I mean by that is by product family, it is tracking the forecast accuracy as well as bias. And if we look at high level in the chart, and let's not concentrate on the individual numbers, but the top chart here is showing you the forecast accuracy, and each colored band is basically a different forecast. And we are looking at the charts in groups of months, right? So you have for February, March, and April, we are tracking the forecast for each individual input. So we have here statistical forecast, we have sales forecast, we have regional forecast, and we have consensus forecast. So these kind of charts help you at a high level here to see which forecast gave you the best result. And you try to give that feedback into your collaboration process that, okay, for this particular month, I saw a lot more improvement from regional forecasting team. For example, here I saw significant improvement by these 2 or 3 teams, statistical, sales, and consensus. So it's possible. You can track this information not just by month, but also by individual categories, product categories or product families, and then drive that in terms of feedback into your collaboration process. And you can certainly drill down into each individual product and customers to look at which were the ones which proved to be good or not good. And same thing for bias also. And the last thing is the forecast value add, where we are tracking which forecast is adding what sort of value. So here you'll see again for each individual month, the different groups here, different bars represent different forecast, right? So you'll see that this blue bar had the highest impact in terms of improving the forecast as compared to statistical forecast, right? So you'll see about 15% improvement as compared to the statistical. You'll see that regional improved about 5% as compared to statistical. So here you can track how value added each individual level of input was, right? Okay, and that's pretty much it what I wanted to share. So I'll give it back to you, Helen. Thank you everyone for joining, and go ahead.
So we would like to urge you to visit our website to access the recording of this webinar as well as other webinars that we've conducted in the past. Recordings are usually up on our website a few days after the webinar. If you
Yeah,
like,
I know there was a question around that, so certainly we will be offering that as an option.
also if you like a personalized product demonstration on Akiva, on how Akiva can help you achieve a better planning process, please visit our website to request a demo or identify that during the webinar survey or simply email me with that request.